All right, welcome everybody. It is 2021 and you are all at the Business Climate Leaders All Hands meeting, our first one of the year, and very excited to be here with you all. Exciting times for sure, not only because it's raining in the Bay Area, but also because we have a new administration in Congress and are excited about what the year ahead holds. So feel free to add your comments and questions into chat, and we'll have a lot of time to talk once we get through our initial presentations. And we're going to be joined by Kyle Kamian from our CCL's new business director, and also Matthew Capuano Rizzo, our BCL intern, to talk about the possibilities with the Biden administration for climate legislation. We're going to kick things off. Let me introduce my colleague, Sarah McGregor from Boston, if you'd unmute yourself, and she's going to share an update review of some of the things that we got done in 2020.
Well, welcome everyone. It's so great to have so many enthusiastic people joining us for this send out of 2021. A lot of great stuff is on the horizon, but we also can look back at 2020 and say we got a lot of work done despite all sorts of challenges that we were all facing. We had a number of great new endorsements from Atheneum Analytics, Hannon Armstrong DSM, and Fetzer, the well-known winery. And we've just had a lot of engagement with who are really directing towards advocacy for the price on carbon. And we are garnering a lot of support. There's a lot of momentum building. 2020 was a great indication of that. We had 11 sector declaration campaigns with nearly 2,500 new signatures. That was pretty impressive. We had a new BCL intern program, which attracted incredible candidates. We had 7 students last summer, 4 in the fall. We've attracted just an incredible array of really talented, young, environmentally conscious, policy-driven students. So that's really exciting and hopeful. They've just been doing a lot with us, including Matthew, who will be joining us. In marketing and communications, we've extended support for our sector teams, focusing on industry-specific information. Of course, the outreach campaigns have been really popular as well, and those have been supported through our chapter outreach. So thank you for everyone who's been moving in that direction and sharing those campaign initiatives. We've made some improvements to the BCL website and have extended our social media outreach, which is somewhat of a new territory for us, but to also be gaining momentum, and we've got young minds working on those aspects as well. Just to get Business Climate Leader and CCL's missions out there, to make us well known, to engage more help. And that's been really successful so far, with the future on the horizon. Regular publication of news blogs have also been really successful. And one of our biggest contributors in the recent past has been Matthew. He's really done a fantastic job focusing on policy, climate research in particular sectors. We've had a number of contributors along those lines. And those are really there to serve, to help people understand what's happening in policy and within certain sectors. We've had a number of events. Most of them were remote, as all of them were last year, including the American Meteorological Society Centennial, which was here in Boston last January. I think it may have been the last in-person event we did, except for some of the CCL events around the country right before March hit down on us. There was a huge conference hosted by Ceres, who's one of our good support colleagues, which was, I think there were close to 300 or maybe more than 300 companies who gathered remotely, albeit, to discuss investment, business directives, on climate. And that was also a huge draw. There were an incredible number of people who were able to attend because it was a remote event. BCL members were speakers at a number of really important panels, also remote events. And BCL hosted some incredibly successful remote webinars.
Oops. She's having issues.
Looks like a lot of people can't hear.
Okay,
Yeah,
I think we lost Sarah. So I'll just finish up to say that we had a number of good industry-specific initiatives, from the ski industry to the wine industry, and did a number of trainings successful within CCL meetings. So with that, if Matthew's here, Mark, do you see him? Do you want to introduce
Yes,
Matthew?
he is. I would be happy to. Yeah, Matthew, and welcome. Yeah, Matthew is one of our interns this year. We have quite a crew of very talented young people working with us this year. Matthew is going for a dual BA right now, and he's in France, so he's with us at a very late or very early hour, and going for a dual degree from Columbia University there. He has been a prolific contributor to our blog, and I urge you to take a look at our blogs. Some very good content there. And one of those blogs has led to his presentation tonight on the Climate 21 project. So Matthew, if you are ready, why don't you take over?
Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you all. I'm Matthew, calling in from France. Can you all see the screen?
Oh yeah.
We can.
Perfect. Okay. And so I wrote, just a brief context, I wrote an article about the Climate 21 project a few weeks ago. And so I'll start by explaining that and kind of the Biden-Harris administration's action on this project, and then kind of go into legislative, options based on this full government approach. And so first, what is a whole of government approach, and where did this idea come from? And so the whole of government, kind of self-explanatory, means that we're taking the whole government to approach the climate crisis. And the idea came from the Climate 21 project, which was a group of 150 experts assembled by Christy Goldfuss, who is former deputy director of the National Park Service and also the chair of the Council on Environmental Quality under Obama, and Tim Profeta, who is the director of the Nicholas School of the Environment at Duke University. And so in 2018, they kind of got together, and they were obviously, not content with the way things were going under the previous administration. And so they decided that there are already a lot of legislative proposals out there. And so what they wanted to do is to look how we can take the full force of the government to put it behind tackling the climate crisis. And so they got all of these experts from the Obama administration, from other administrations, who would actually run all of these government agencies to see how they can use these tools of government administration to tackle the climate crisis. And so they went agency by agency. I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm just going to go through a few of them. And they picked out, specific things that that those agencies can do. And so what does the Climate 21 project recommend for each agency, and how has Biden acted on those recommendations? And so first is the president. So that's kind of the headquarters of this full government approach. And so the Climate 21 project recommended that the president create a national climate council to coordinate climate in all the government agencies. Then also to use the Council on Environmental Quality, which has existed since the Nixon era, to elevate issues of environmental justice. And so Biden has already moved in this direction. He created a White House Office of Domestic Climate Policy, which is led by Gina McCarthy, who's on the left, former EPA administrator and CEO of the Natural Resources Defense Council. And then he also appointed environmental lawyer Brenda Mallory to lead the Office on Environmental Quality. And so we have Gina McCarthy who's in charge of climate policy across the government. And we have Brenda Mallory, who's in charge of all environmental policy across the government. And in terms of actions based on this, the January 20th executive order moved to reinstate the famous 100 environmental rules that the Trump administration has either rolled back or is in the process of rolling back, and then also rejoining the Paris Agreement. And so next is the Office of Management Budget. That's a big, it's not very well known. Well, it became well known with the transition, but overall not very well known. And they play a huge role because it's the government's procurement office. And so we all know the government is pretty large. It buys a lot of things. And so if the government, for example, buys its electricity from 100% renewable sources, or if the government commits to a zero emissions fleet, that can really change things because it makes those industries have less risk because we have this big buyer who's in the market who is going to buy these zero emissions technologies. And so in countries like Denmark and Norway, we see what this big government support can do. So for example, in Norway, we have big subsidies for electric vehicles, big government purchase of electric vehicles. They are now at 54% electric vehicles being sold. And so Neera Tanden, who is Biden's nominee for this position, has pledged, to use the buying power of the government to move in a climate direction. She has faced some Republican opposition for being liberal and some Democratic opposition for her ties to corporate donors. But nevertheless, one of the other recommendations for the Climate 21 project would be to incorporate the social cost of carbon, which under Trump has declined to $1 per ton. And so the idea would be to bring that back. And so a better way, that's a good idea, but also a better way would to have the Energy Innovation Act to have an actual price on carbon. So next, moving to the EPA, which is the most obvious agency to tackle the climate crisis. It's been, kind of in a rut for the past 4 years. It's been run by coal lobbyist Andrew Wheeler. And so the Climate 21 project said that the EPA can kind of tackle all three aspects of the climate crisis. So to tackle reducing those emissions, climate diplomacy, and also adaptation. And so because of the makeup of the Supreme Court, the Climate 21 project said the EPA should also collaborate with organizations in the public and the private sector, like businesses, to establish durable progress. So that way we don't have this flip-flop, that we can keep moving in the right direction. And so who Biden tapped for that is Michael Reagan, who is the head, or who I guess was the head of North Carolina's environmental agency. And he's kind of familiar with, restoring the morale at environmental organizations because he took over for Donald von der Var, who questioned the scientific consensus on climate. He's also very familiar with environmental justice. In North Carolina, he created a committee on it. And he also won the largest coal ash settlement cleanup in the country. So next is the and so it's also not a very flashy agency, but it is very powerful because there are 500 million acres of public lands, and there are a lot of states that are almost made up of entirely of federal lands. Like if you look at a map, it's pretty much all red of federal lands. So the states are Nevada, Idaho, Utah, Arizona, Wyoming, Alaska, and Oregon. And so the authors argue that kind of instead of opening up those lands for oil and gas, that they can be used for, carbon sequestration, for renewable energy, for supporting Native American tribes. And so one of the proposals in the Climate 21 project was to halt leases on fossil fuel exploitation, which we're expecting to see Wednesday. And Congressman Deb Haaland, who was appointed to this position, is really exciting. She'd be the first Native American appointed to a cabinet level position. And she's been, somewhat critical of the current Secretary of the Interior, who has, reduced monuments like Barriers National Park to 15% of its previous size. And it would also be great to have her in the position because of the, former relationship with the Bureau of Indian Affairs and Indigenous people that, has not really respected their sovereignty in a lot of ways. And it also is a great sign for the overall environmental movement because 80% of global biodiversity is protected by Indigenous people. So 80% of global biodiversity is protected by Indigenous people. So it's great that we have an Indigenous person at the head of Interior. In Biden's first day of office, he rescinded permits for the Keystone Pipeline and halted drilling in the Arctic, and there's more coming on Wednesday. which is tomorrow. And next is the Department of Energy. And the Department of Energy does a lot of research. And so the idea with the Climate 21 project is to move research to climate and to have it be the main focus. And they also propose having a climate strike team that would kind of go through the different previous administration rules and get rid of ones that aren't helpful. And the person that Biden tapped for that is former governor, Michigan Governor Jennifer Granholm, who supports climate action. She supports electric vehicles. And so her job would also be made easier, like all of this, with a carbon fee and dividend. And so if you want to move like the energy sector to the right direction, a carbon fee dividend helps a lot, like you guys know. And the United Kingdom, that led to a 93% reduction in coal in the electricity sector. Then we have the Department of Transportation, which is the largest contributor to greenhouse gases in the United States. And so the Climate 21 project kind of says that the secretary has to restore the emission standards, expand EV charging, and expand low carbon transit. And one of the things they also said was to have a visiting mayor's office. And so it's kind of cool that we have a mayor who is taking over, because a lot of what transportation does is to give grants to local governments so that they can expand their public transportation, so they can expand their highways, so they can expand different transit options. And so Mayor Pete would go from having 47 buses to having $87 billion. So it would be it's a big switch for him. But he led this program called Smart Streets, which expanded sidewalks and bike lanes. And so what he's doing is he's planning to expand public transit for cities that have over 100,000 residents. And I think that's a really important thing, because right now public transit's being cut across the country because states and local governments don't have the money to keep it open. And if we don't keep public transit, we already don't have enough public transit. So if we have less, then we're really not in a good space. And so one of the ways that would help, I guess, is if we have the carbon fee and dividend. Like you guys know, if we have gasoline prices go up a bit, then people will go back to the public transit. And then if we also have the investment in public transit, then it's a win-win. Lastly, we have the Department of Treasury. Everyone's been excited in BCL that we have Janet Yellen. And so you guys know that she's part of the Climate Leadership Council, that she supports the tax on carbon emissions, that she can also do things with climate risk, which if you read my latest article is about that. And so the Financial Stability Oversight Council can, put climate risk as like a main priority. And also by evaluating oil and gas companies for their risk, she can also deny them financing, which would be huge. And so then on the legislative front, so how does this the interaction between the full government approach and the legislative front? And so one of the things that Danny Richter talks about is how the bullying pulpit of the president can move legislative proposals. So that kind of leads us to the slide, which is climate versus the Senate. And so there you can see Joe Manchin shooting the cap and trade bill. And so that kind of the 60 filibuster rule puts Republicans that are on the Climate Solutions Committee in critical positions, as well as moderate Democrats like Joe Manchin. So we have Senator Michael Braun, we have Senator Lisa Murkowski, Mitt Romney, Lindsey Graham, Marco Rubio, Susan Collins, and Rob Portman. So all of them are on the Climate Solutions Council. So the idea would be that if you're on the Climate Solutions Council, that you're actually interested in having climate solutions. So hopefully a climate solution like the Carbon Fee and Dividend Acts would be appealing to them. And then Joe Manchin, even though he, was somewhat supportive of Trump leaving the Paris Agreement and things like that, he also in December worked with his Republican colleagues to get that $35 billion in clean energy spending in December's relief bill. And so Joe Manchin has come a long way since the 2010, shot through the cap and trade. And so one of the things that with senators like Joe Manchin and Mitch McConnell, who come from coal communities, who come from fossil fuel communities, is to show that their communities still have a future in a zero carbon economy. And so one of the legislative proposals to do this would be to have a federal green bank. And so a lot of states have this, like Michigan and New York. And so the Michigan bank, it creates $30 of private investment for every $1 of public investment. So the idea is that you catalyze all this investment into Black and brown communities, into fossil fuel communities or formerly fossil fuel communities. And so that way no one's being left out in the transition. And, and so that could be paired with the fee and dividend strategy. And so then the last thing is kind of what should we do? And so here are kind of, I guess, my thoughts on what we should do. I think that telling stories is really like a great way of catalyzing action, because on climate, a lot of times it can, even if we're talking about in money or we're talking about in terms of emissions, it can be kind of abstract. And so I think like the Standing Rock Sioux is a great story, because everyone knows, you know, they fought the Dakota Access Pipeline. They're still fighting the Dakota Access Pipeline. But in the meantime, they've constructed a giant solar farm. And so we see how like they're moving into the future. We also have Port Arthur, Texas, which is an African-American community. They have 15% higher cancer rates and 40% higher mortality, because they're next to Saudi Aramco's oil refinery that refines oil from the Keystone Pipeline. And so there we see like the actual consequences, and they've been fighting for a while at the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. And then we also have the broader context that wind, you know, passed coal in Texas's energy generation, that Texas, Iowa, and Oklahoma, all Republican states, lead the country in installed wind. And so then we also have the United States installed 37 gigawatts, which is a record of solar and wind last year, and that we need to hit 40 gigawatts each year to get to 90%, so we're almost there. And then we also have that 3 times more people are employed by renewable energy than fossil fuels, and that those jobs are once again concentrated in Republican states like Alabama, Alaska, Florida, Illinois, Kansas, Montana, North Dakota, and Wyoming. And so the idea is that like for Republicans to show that it's in Republican states that these jobs are being made, so that their future is for their constituents as well. And then for Democrats to show that executive action is great, but that if the next president comes in and then just undoes everything, that's not how we solve the climate crisis, because it's, even though we have all these effects right now, it's a long-term problem. And so we need to have long-term solutions like the fee and dividend and like these long-term investments. So I'm happy to take questions. Thank you for listening. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the presentation.
Thank you, Matthew. Fantastic. So if you're still okay to stay up or get on with your day, we'll save our questions for just a little bit. So over to Bruce right now to introduce Kyle.
Hey, everybody. Thanks. And thank you, Sarah and Kyle. The news is really great, and it's raining here in Northern California. So I want to introduce, speaking of putting the right people in the right job, I wanted to introduce Matthew Kamane. He's a new, what is his title here? Senior Business Relations Representative, and he fills a really critical position for CCL, and that we've been making increasing contacts and relationships with big companies, big trade groups, and now we have somebody on Danny Richter's staff who is pretty much devoted full time to helping us put things together. So I see you're on there, Kyle. Why don't you take it away?
Thanks, Bruce. Can everybody hear me all right? Excellent. As Bruce mentioned, I'm Kyle Kamane. I have been here with CCL for about 2 months now, so pretty new. I am on Danny Richter's team. My title, as Bruce mentioned, is Senior Business Relations Representative. And I'll give you a little bit about me and my background, and then I'll dive into some of the more CCL specific stuff. So I come from St. Louis, Missouri. I was born and raised there, grew up there, moved out to DC about 5 years ago. I studied economics in undergrad and then worked for the Regional Chamber of Commerce in St. Louis for some time. I got involved with their public policy team, moved out to DC and landed with Home Depot's government relations team. I worked on federal, state, and local policy for them for a while, for about 2 years, and then spent the last 2.5 years with them running their political action committee. So raising money, working with legislators to build coalitions, running our grassroots communications, and then doing our legislator site visits, our elected official site visits. So that's where we would host elected officials at Home Depot stores around the country. So I did about 300 of those in just a few years. Coming on board here at CCL, I was looking for an opportunity to kind of bring the business and public policy acumen to a policy area that I cared about. I was always involved in environmental activities when I was growing up, whether it was Leadership Environmental Action Project or other clubs in college, in high school and college. And so this was kind of an issue that was near and dear to my heart, and something that I could do in a professional capacity and bring a skill set to kind of help accomplish our goals. So I'm really excited about that. And it's been a pleasure to come on board and to get to know everyone. And, I really look forward to what we can all accomplish together. Danny and Ben have been extremely welcoming and helping me get on board here, get up to speed, meet the steering committee of BCL, figure out how we can work together and really move the ball forward. So my role primarily is to focus on how we can expand in our engagement with businesses at a national level. So I will focus on national businesses and trade associations, their government relations and policy teams, et cetera, but also working with the organization to have kind of a overall top-down strategy for how we're going to engage with businesses, even the small and local businesses for our individual chapters. We have done obviously a ton of that over the years. And the goal here is just to help our volunteers have more information, more resources at their disposal to help them be as effective as they can possibly be. As we look to really increase that roster of businesses and grasstops advocates that are coming to, lobby their legislators and convince their local elected officials, federal elected officials, et cetera, to get on board, especially when you consider that, a lot of the kind of challenge that we face in many ways in the past has been in part led by kind of a reticence from the business community or an ability for some political figures to fall back on that reticence from the business community. I'm sure many of you saw the U.S. Chamber's comments the other day, which are welcome, of course. We are excited to hear that they're interested in market-based solutions. That is obviously a move in our direction. They were intentionally vague, but we know that when they say market-based, they mean carbon pricing or cap and trade. And so now we will be engaging with them at the national level to kind of get them to see if we can get them to commit to a more specific stance. But one thing that we can say for certain is that is indicating that they will no longer be an opponent to the degree that they have been before. And that is a big win. So we welcome that statement. We look forward to engaging with them as we move forward. When it comes to the legislative landscape, Matthew just did a great job of describing a lot of what's out there. So I'll give like a 30,000 foot view and won't get super specific. As you can imagine, things are messy right now. We still don't have the power sharing agreement hammered out in the Senate, although it looks like we had a breakthrough yesterday, which is good. And we have a lot of competing priorities. We have the impeachment trial in the Senate. We've got a lot of confirmations that need to be happening, although they are happening. So we can take some solace in the fact that those are at least moving forward. We're seeing the Senate work to a degree. And in the House, they also have competing priorities with COVID relief and other pressures that they're facing. So right now, what we know is that climate is still a top priority for the administration and for the Congress. We know that Congressman Deutsch, this is his top priority. He has said that he is waiting for the best time he feels the bill to get the right amount of attention. He expects to reintroduce it in the first quarter. So we're looking forward to that. And he's still working with a few Republican offices to identify who the Republican co-sponsor is going to be. But he feels good about that. And the bill is going to be reintroduced much in the same form as we saw it previously. So we're very excited about that. In the Senate, we're going to have to wait a little bit to see how committees shake out, how lots of other competing priorities work there. But we're confident that there's going to be a lot